Well, welcome back, everybody. This is Rachel, and today in episode 5, we're going to explore exactly what was it worth. Why did Judge Connolly risk his career as a brand new judge just to preside over Court File 51, DIV 1841? Now, this is a review of subject matter jurisdiction. Remember that all of these episodes are like a chapter of a book. You get a history from the previous episodes, and we covered the subject matter jurisdiction in episode 3. If you've not seen those, please go back and watch, and you will understand that a judge literally has zero authority unless he derives that authority from the legislative body. That was all covered in episode 2. And subject matter jurisdiction is the authority that a court or a judge has to issue rulings and opinions in a case. And there are many things that play into that. It is 100% derived from the legislator. And without any jurisdiction, a judge has no authority. This can never be waived. So why are we doing these presentations? Because Kristi Noem's judges in South Dakota are dictators. Now, a dictator is a form of government in which one person or a small group of people believe that they possess absolute power and they operate outside the United States constitutional limitations, and in this case, the South Dakota constitutional limitations. So, Justice for South Dakota is showing you story after story how the judges in Pennington County have zero regard for the law. They have established a law all to themselves, and therefore they're dictators. These justices are upholding rulings only for white privileged males, and they intentionally destroy families. They go out of their way to completely obliterate female-owned businesses, and they will throw you in jail if you dare stand up for your constitutional civil rights. They will stop at absolutely nothing to be dictators. And the story, the price of telling these stories comes with being imprisoned, and I'm getting the word out because they're working very hard to try to get me in jail. This is a picture of Pennington County 7th Circuit Court, the heart of corruption. Now, I'm going to show you, remember that I said that we tell facts. We don't give anything that's not found in the actual transcripts, and because of that, I'm going to show you evidence for every single thing that I say. This is where it all began. If you refer back to episode 4, Who Was Timothy John Evans, you'll find extensive documentation of how he abused Rachel. And finally, after he continued to enter her house and she could not ever get away from him. Remember, they were living apart. He'd already filed for a divorce, and now he's inside her house. So she requested a protection order because he was beating her up. Now, who's entitled to a protection order? And this is South Dakota Codified Law 25-10-2, and an application for a protection order can be filed in a circuit court where any party to the proceeding resides, which means that Rachel could have filed in Hill County in Montana or in Pennington County. And the chapter of South Dakota Codified Law 25-10 gives you a way to seek protection from another family member or household member who has physically abused you or who has threatened to physically abuse you. You can also obtain a stalking order if the judge finds that the level of criteria is not met for an actual protection order. Then you can obtain a stalking protection order under SDCL 22-19A. Now remember that during this hearing, Tim admitted he abused Rachel. He testified both during the divorce trial and also this protection order hearing that he grabbed her by her arms, held her against the wall many times during their marriage. I would counteract that and say no, he did not. He just did it a few times. However, he also admitted to one episode on July 23rd or 24th, I can go back and look at the date, where Rachel's third child walked in with a neighbor neighbor boy, and he told them, "Oh, don't worry, Mommy and Daddy, you're just playing." Tim kicked the door of Rachel's bedroom in, and those were the pictures from the previous slide where he's gloating over fixing it. He sprayed Rachel and her 4-year-old son with pepper spray while they're sleeping. He admitted to have a handgun in the bedroom, but denied that it was underneath his pillow. And on August 11th, 2022, Rachel could no longer walk without manually lifting up her right leg due to the torn muscles and sequela of him fracturing her pelvis. So she had to undergo a right hip repair. Now, Tim was prohibited from entering Rachel's home. When you file for divorce, part of the summons is that you have to serve these restraining orders. Otherwise, there's penalties for the person not serving them. And because there were children involved, Rachel had 4 children, and so Tim was required by law to serve the South Dakota parenting guidelines, along with the summons and complaint in any divorce proceeding. Now, he did serve this upon Rachel on January 23rd, 2018. The sheriff gave her a copy in addition to the actual summons of the divorce complaint. And under the legislative and active authority, the guidelines became mandatory as a parenting plan and are enforceable as a court order upon initiation of the divorce proceeding, which means that Judge Connolly was required by law to uphold the fact that Section 4.13, privacy of residence, a parent shall not enter the residence of the other parent except by express invitation, no matter if that opposite parent has a personal investment in the property. And so Judge Connolly was required to uphold by law, enacted by the legislative session and signed by the governor, that Tim was prohibited from entering Rachel's home. This is extremely important to remember later, and why Judge Connolly is a dictator. So on the transcript, and these are taken directly out of the transcript from this protection order hearing, which occurred on March 23rd, 2018, Judge Connolly stated, "I agree with you," and he's referencing Mitch Johnson, who's Timothy John Evans's attorney, "that I'm not sure if she, who is Rachel, has met her burden as to everything that she alleged in the temporary protection order. I'm not going to grant it at this time." However, then Judge Connolly starts to contradict himself and says, "I think she has put on some evidence at the very least of potential harassment," which means that he had to, by law, issue the harassment and stalking order. And then later on he said, "I have to find," and he's telling now Rachel, "you have to prove by a preponderance of evidence that domestic abuse has taken place as defined by SDCL 25-10. And there's a number of ways you can do that. You have to prove that physical harm, bodily injury has taken place." Now, I'm going to interrupt his transcript there. Remember that Rachel had her right hip muscles torn, her pelvis fractured. Tim had kicked the door in. He admitted to spraying them with pepper spray and everything else during this hearing. It's all part of the transcripts. Judge Connolly says, "Sorry, you didn't meet the level of preponderance of evidence. I'm not going to issue a protection order." Why? Because Rachel requested it. Now, it was during this exact same protection order hearing, it wasn't even a hearing for a divorce proceeding, that Judge Connolly then proceeded to start to establish his jurisdiction in Evans versus Evans. It's all part of the protection order transcript. So why would Judge Connolly completely break all protocol and law, and why would he stick his neck out? What was this court file DIV 18-41 worth? So during the same hearing, all these transcripts are taken from this TPO. Now, Mr. Johnson, who's Tim's attorney, is interviewing him, and he says, "What's your age?" 50. "What's your current occupation?" "Oh, I operate a restoration business." "What kind of restoration business is it?" All right, what did you do prior to that? Were you a police officer? To which Tim proudly says, yes, I was a police officer from 1992 until 1999. Now, why would Mitch Johnson try to bring this up? Well, it's because if you are a former police officer or a current police officer, South Dakota won't prosecute you. They immediately let you off. So Pennington County, they cover you up if you're a police officer. Now, Tim is in court, protection order hearing. He's already been found to have beaten Rachel up, self-admitted that he's done all this domestic violence to her. And they're going to play the, oh, quick, get out of jail free card. I'm a white privileged male. I'm also a former police officer, and that means I get out. And then Mitch Johnson proceeds on. Did you also serve in Havre, Montana in the area of a fireman? Tim says, yes, I was a fireman from 1999 until 2015. And now Judge Connolly is talking to George, the transcriptionist, about how if you can spell it. And so then Mitch goes, so Tim, you started the divorce action of January this year, right? Correct? So let's see how much this was worth. Well, Tim did serve in the Havre Police Department. He served 7 years and 2.3 months. During that time, when he left at the police department in 1999, he had $17,600 invested for a retirement. And Tim had, the way that this changed, he was actually gets a half of confirmed police officer's salary at the age of 52. So 2 years from this divorce trial, his retirement would not be based off that $17,000. It would actually bump up to over $17,000 per year. And Tim had promised Rachel that she would collect this amount of retirement as his spouse until she died. Not just when Tim passed away, but then when Rachel died as well. And then Tim's retirement from the Havre Fire Department. So we'll show you the income levels later, but when Tim retired in 2015, he was as high as you can go. Well, no, he's an engineer. You can reach captain after that, and he retired prior to making captain. Anyways, we'll show you the amounts of money he made when he met Rachel and then when he retired. But again, this is a second full retirement that Rachel would collect as a spouse until she died. She would continue to collect the full amount that Tim would normally have at working it until after he passed away, until she passed away. There's only a couple retirements in the United States that do this, and police and fire are both of them. In addition, remember back in episode 4 where we said how Tim was in the military? So in 2014, Tim had Rachel agree to purchase his military time. Remember 2014. So Tim wanted to purchase the 4 years and 7 months of his Navy service at a purchase price of $90,000 so that, again, Rachel could have part of her military, or it would roll over to the fire department so he could retire without putting in the full 20 years minimum required amount. He wanted to retire at like 15 years served, and that's why they had to pay over $90,000 so he could retire 5 years early. Now, Tim retained full control of all of this retirement during his fake divorce. Rachel had no retirement savings. In addition, do you remember the nightmares that dated all the way back to Tim's early childhood and teen years? Well, after he filed for divorce, he contacted the VA in South Dakota, and he claimed he's disabled. So in 2018, during the time frame that he was getting the divorce, he secretly underwent and scammed the VA, stating that he had PTSD. Now, Tim has never served a day of actual combat in his life. He did spend 4 years of active duty, which he purchased the time, put it into a retirement. Now he's going to scam the VA and say that he's a disabled vet. So he did have hearing loss, had a 10% hearing loss, and then he got 50% hearing loss or PTSD. If you read the description of what you have to actually accomplish to receive this PTSD, this is a slap in the face to normal veterans who have served and who do have legit, issues from being in active duty. So here's Tim. He's completed a career as both police and fire department, receiving 2 full retirements from them, testifying under oath that he's competent and everything else, and now he's scamming the military and saying that he has difficulty maintaining work and social relationships, that he's pretty much delusional, and he goes into these spells. So why would Tim scam the VA and say that he's a disabled veteran? Money is the answer, because Tim is a fraud, and a veteran who, with a 60% disability rating, he gets over $1,000 a month versus a 10% hearing loss. I think it's around $300. So he claims to have a mental health condition caused by the military, even though it dates back to his childhood years. And remember now, Tim has 4 children that he is trying to get custody of. So his rating goes from $1,000 by himself to over $1,400 with only 1 child, and then he gets an additional $60 for every child after that. Also, if Tim can get primary custody of the kids, then he wants to sue Rachel for child support. So it's all about money and fraud with Tim Evans. Now, this is pulling directly from the transcript, and Judge Connolly had just asked Rachel what she did and where she worked and stuff. Rachel had just told him, I went to work at Native Women's Healthcare. Now, Rachel was a nurse midwife and had dedicated her career to underserved populations, happened to be working extensively with Native American Indians, and Judge Connolly is very biased against Native American Indians. So Rachel had just told him, not knowing any of this, that she worked at Native Women's Healthcare in Rapid City. And Judge Connolly then proceeds into establishing jurisdiction, and he goes, okay, but here's the question. Do you have objection to me having jurisdiction over this case? Rachel said, actually, I do, because my husband was not a resident when he filed for divorce. So what was Rachel referring to? Then Judge Connolly proceeds on to say, wait a minute. He can be a resident of Mars. It doesn't matter. And Rachel goes, no, actually, by law, he can't. And Judge Connolly's like, wrong. Rachel's like, he has to be a resident at the time of filing. And Judge Connolly's like, nope, we're not going there. So what was Rachel referring to, and what was Judge Connolly being a dictator? South Dakota legislature has established guidelines for jurisdiction. Again, we covered this in episode 3. You can only have jurisdiction for a divorce action under the provisions of 24-4-30, which is the subject matter jurisdiction, which can never be waived. And it says the plaintiff in an action must, at the time the action is commenced, be a resident of South Dakota. So, how do we determine when Tim was a resident? Well, Tim has lots of little businesses. Remember I said he likes to scam and steal money, that sort of thing. So he established this business called Fun Rentals. Here are the business filings of Fun Rentals. September 11th, 2017, remember the divorce action was filed on January 23rd, 2018. So this is only a couple months prior. Tim John Evans, 910 14th Street, Havre, Montana. He established a business for Fun Rentals. And then on the right is a loan and a bank account that he opened up on September 13th, 2017, Bear Paw Credit Union, Havre, Montana. So to prove to you how Tim lies in court, this is the testimony sworn as true under oath between Mitch Johnson, Tim's attorney, and Tim during this protection order hearing. And it's on page 73, and it says, "How long have you lived in the house in Rapid City?" And Tim states, "Since 2015. Well, that's funny, because the order of these snowmobiles that Tim purchased for fun rentals, and he purchased them so that he could take his girlfriend Sue's and his boyfriend Jeff Haskell snowmobiling. There's fun rentals is a complete scam, not legit whatsoever. But anyways, so the invoice was September of 2017. And Tim is trying to get custody of Rachel's house in Rapid City right now. So on page 73, it's Mitch is talking with Tim, and it says, "Do you guys own a house in Montana?" And Tim's like, "Yes, we do. And it's a fairly valuable home, don't you think?" And Tim's like, "Oh, yes, it was appraised for $430,000 before we finished the basement." Well, that was kind of a lie, but I'll let you figure that out later. And then Mitch Johnson goes, "Oh, and the house you have in Rapid City, is that pretty expensive home as well?" And Tim's like, not really. It's probably only worth $370,000 to $380,000. And that was back in 2015. The truth of the matter is it was worth more than that. Rachel had paid cash for that house in Rapid City and owned it outright. Now, here's a couple more invoices for these brand new Arctic Cat snowmobiles under fun rentals. And again, 910 14th Street is Tim's address. So he just committed perjury, said he'd lived in Rapid City since 2015, and yet he's a resident of Montana. Now let's talk about Rachel. So Rachel was working in Wolf Point, Montana. Again, very critical access. It's a very remote, it's pretty much the most remote region in the 48 states, and there is extremely limited health care there. They do serve Native American Indians. It was a private organization, though. It was an amazing place to work. And Rachel worked part-time up there. It was 2 weeks on, 2 to 3 weeks off. She wound up working 22 weeks a year is all. And Rachel took the children with her. Tim tried to tell her, and Rachel agreed, that as the kids got older, it wasn't feasible in the long run. The children needed to, like when they were on sports and stuff, as they got older, they were more involved in a ton of community activities. So he mandated that Rachel resigned. So Rachel did resign on January 17th. And when Rachel made this decision, she did so because she was already enrolled to get her nurse practitioner degree, and she would be finished with it, only had 2 semesters left of part-time work. She had over $30,000 cash sitting in the bank to live on. Her house was paid for. She was taking care of her kids. They had 0 bills except for food and utilities. And she had over $140,000 outstanding in business outcome through Tim Evans Carpet Care, which we'll get to in a minute. So when Rachel made the decision to quit her job in Wolf Point, Montana, it was also under the knowledge that she had a house, she had income, and a business that was bringing in money that she worked as well. Now, here's a picture of Rachel's house that Sue's wanted to live in and Tim wanted to get. So now Tim is talking with Mitch Johnson again, and they're trying to convince Judge Connolly on March 23rd. Remember, Rachel had quit her job January 17th. She no longer was employed at this point. And they're arguing the case why Tim should have custody of Rachel's home. And Mitch Johnson goes, "Well, send her back to Montana because her employer will provide housing for her." Rachel's not employed. Okay. And then Rachel says, before you grant my husband my home that he hasn't paid any money for here in South Dakota, I think he should have to prove how he earned it, because remember, he's claiming that he lives up in Havre. And I asked Judge Connolly, give Tim residence at the house that he claimed. Number one, Judge Connolly doesn't have jurisdiction to preside over this, and now he is making decisions over where Rachel lives. And Mr. Johnson's like, wow, as in, wow, make Tim go back to live in the house that he's lived in for the last how many years? And Rachel said it's on his tax returns. He was registered to vote in Havre, Montana. He only changed his driver's license over to my address in February, which was after he signed the divorce. And then the court goes, so Mr. Johnson, if they own houses in both states and have spent a considerable amount of time in both states, and then Judge Connolly lies and says, and Miss Evans agrees that I have jurisdiction over this case. So remember, I've contested jurisdiction multiple times. I have never agreed to it. Then Judge Connolly promptly decided that, well, Tim should have Rachel's home. What else did he decide? So now Rachel's homeless and doesn't have the job in Montana anymore. What about Tim Evans Carpet Care? Well, Tim began Tim Evans Carpet Care in Havre, Montana in 1995, and he ran it for 10 years. We're going to see how much money he made from it for 10 years. Rachel took over the business in 2005, so this is now a female-owned business, and she was a 90% owner. And Tim had 10% of stocks, and he illegally sold a lot of equipment in 2015, and then he invested the money with his best friend, Jeff. So let's compare income, because this was extensively discussed. So when Rachel first met Tim, it was typical. She met him in 2004. It's typical to go back 3 years to see what your net worth is. That way you can't hide or launder money. And Tim was 35 to 37 years old during 2002 to 2004. He made $16,000 from the Havre Fire Department, and he only made $18,000 from his business. 2003, he made $17,000 from the Havre Fire Department and $12,000 from his business. And in 2004, the year he met Rachel, he only made $16,000 from Havre Fire Department and $14,000 from his business. Now, these were verified by tax returns. That's exactly where these numbers came from, and they're exhibits 97, 98, 99 from the trial. So Judge Connolly had access to these. Now, Rachel was 20 to 22 years old. In 2002, she made over $30,000, pretty much par with Tim. In 2003, she made $29,000, more than Tim by a long shot. And pretty much equal, I'm sorry. And then 2004, so she started her nursing degree in 2003, and she's going to school more than full time, because remember, she's finishing her bachelor's, 12 credits after she finishes her associates. And so she's pretty much condensing a ton of school into once, plus she's paying cash for her education and working. So that's why in 2004, now she's in school full time and not able to work anymore. So she only made $7,500. Let's fast forward. Rachel took over the business in 2005. Let's go to 2015. Tim makes $15,900 from the Havre Fire Department. Then he also made $10,000 from Tim Evans Carpet Care. And then he had his retirement accounts coming in, which was over $20,000. So he's primarily just not working and getting money from his retirements. Meanwhile, 2015, Rachel grossed over $217,000. In 2016, Tim only made $2,400 from working. That wound up being from Jeff, and $1,800 from Tim Evans Carpet Care. Meanwhile, 2016, Rachel made over $130,000 or $140,000. And in 2017, the year prior to filing for divorce, Tim made over $37,000 total. That included any work from Tim Evans Carpet Care, but he only earned $9,600 from working. Part of that is also retirement. Meanwhile, Rachel earned over $190,000 and $86,000 from Tim Evans Carpet Care. So now that we've proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is Rachel's source of income and everything else, and Rachel's the one that pays the bills in the family. And notice all the money went into a single bank account. Tim had access to it at all times. So here are the Montana corporate annual reports to prove addresses and names. Was Tim or was Tim not a resident when he filed for divorce? 2015, Rachel's address is the home that now Tim wants custody of, 13734 47th Avenue West, Rapid City. Tim's address is Havre, Montana. Look on the right-hand side, 2016, the exact same thing. Who filled this out? Who submitted it? Electronically submitted by Tim Evans. It's down there at the bottom. Tim himself put down that he's a resident of Havre, Montana. So it's verified with Fun Rentals. It's verified with Tim Evans Carpet Care. So remember when Tim said that he moved to Rapid City in 2015? Well, perjury. We'll get into that later. But here's the annual report for 2017. Tim, again, is the one who filled this out, if you look on the right-hand side towards the bottom. And he put down, again, that Rachel's address was 13734 47th Avenue West, Rapid City, South Dakota. And he put down, again, that Tim Evans' address is Havre, Montana. So going back to episode 4 and episode 3, the whole subject matter jurisdiction, the legislature said you must be a resident at the time of filing for divorce, and the standard was Rush versus Rush, which the Supreme Court decided in 2015, that said that not only did you have to take steps to establish residency in South Dakota, but you also had to be a resident for 45 days or longer prior to filing. And they specifically mentioned establishing a bank account, driver's license, employment, a business, and purchasing property. Tim met none of that by the time he filed for divorce. Here's the pictures of his driver's licenses, and on the right-hand side you can see that on February 16th, he used Rachel's home address to obtain a driver's license, but it was after he had filed for divorce, and therefore this DIV court file is nullified and void. Then he did not establish a business in South Dakota until May 2nd, 2018, and he initiated Restoration Resource, LLC. So why is he doing this? Because Mitch Johnson is a jackass. He had a client. He did not do due diligence. He is now ready to be disbarred because he is practicing outside the scope for an attorney. He brought an illegitimate case into court, and a judge is now violating the law and backing him on it. So during this court hearing at the temporary protection order, not even in a divorce hearing trial, Judge Connolly not only granted Tim Rachel's house, he granted Tim Rachel's business. Rachel now has absolutely zero income because Tim has all his retirement coming straight to him. He stole Rachel's business. Rachel had already quit her job in Montana before Tim filed for divorce. And Tim promptly filed an annual business report using Rachel's home address of Rachel's business with South Dakota in 100% his name. So what did Judge Connolly do? He completely obliterated a female-owned business, Rachel's only income and Rachel's only house, without paying a penny. Here's a domestic violence wheel, power and control, and if you start following along, it's like blowing up in your face here. First, there's the male privilege on the left-hand side. Then there's economic abuse, preventing her from getting a job or keeping a job, making her ask for money. So Tim stole all the money. He actually stole that $30,000 out of the bank that Rachel had counted on, and he diverted all of the money from Rachel's business that was coming in to Jeff Haskell, which was proven in court. So Rachel had zero income, zero house, zero job, 100% homeless, penniless. Meanwhile, he's isolating her from her family, and then using children as bribes. Now make sure that you check out Carpet Care and Restoration, because Rachel and Tim had taken on a partner back in Havre who had quit. He left the partnership back in 2014. But Rachel, meanwhile, because it's her business and she had done these photos for advertising and everything else, she also had drawn up all the papers to be used for restoration companies. And Tim stole that 100% from her. So who is Timothy's Mr. S? So this, again, is from the transcript, and I told you it was a guy. Well, it's Timothy John Evans and Jeff Haskell, by their own admission in court. Rachel's now testifying to Judge Connolly and saying, without telling me, Tim sold over $200,000 of our business equipment. By law, he had to have Rachel's signature on the transactions. As a 10% shareholder, he just sold it. And then he promptly reinvested $150,000 of that into restoration equipment, promptly gave it to Jeff Haskell, his mistress, and he was prohibited by doing it because I own 90% of that business. Meanwhile, Jeff is texting Rachel and hitting on Rachel and saying, I love you. I want to sleep with you. What are you wearing tonight? Now, if this makes you sick, Tim is already hooked up with Sue's, and now Jeff is trying to hook up with Rachel. So Rachel refuses to have anything to do with Jeff and Sue's because all they talk about is wife swapping and threesomes and everything else. And the court, Judge Connolly, says, I'm not sure if it's relevant. Rachel then proceeded to let Judge Connolly know that this entire divorce proceeding is simply a business transaction. Jeff had continued to tell Tim and mandate that he would not make Tim a business partner until he divorced Rachel. And remember that Tim is Jeff's mistress, and this is extensively brought up in episode 6. So not only is Jeff running Tim's life, Tim is Jeff's mistress, Tim is sleeping with Sue's, Jeff's wife, and Jeff thinks that he's the mastermind and he's going to make Rachel submissive to the whole thing. He's going to take Rachel's business away from her. And Judge Connolly went along with it 100%. So we've already gone into how much money Rachel was worth. Judge Connolly took 100% of that away on March 23rd, 2018, without an ounce of jurisdiction to do so. 100% away, and gave it to Tim and Jeff. How much do you think Judge Connolly was bribed to do this? How much? You cannot take away close to $500,000 of assets, including a bought and paid for house, and just 100% give it away in one day. So in the next episode of 6, we're going to start looking at who started Rapid City Restoration. And let's look more into this. Tim being Jeff's mistress, and all of the further financials. This was only part 1 of what it was worth. Wound up being well over $2 million worth that Judge Connolly was in on stealing. Again, this Justice for South Dakota is a project to make Governor Noem accountable to her oath of office and ensure that all of the people under her are faithfully executing the law. unlike the dictators that I continue to bring out, and this is only the tip of the iceberg, people. This is only so far March 23rd of 2018. There is story after story with date after date after date, and we're going to continue exploring this. So Governor Noem, start getting your dictators under control. So we've already gone into quite a few of these, but stay tuned for episode 6 as we see more of the facts and complete disregard for the law. Again, Justice for South Dakota is a privately funded public exposure of the dictatorship and perverted judicial system in South Dakota. All donations are welcome, and I would strongly recommend that you donate anonymously because they retaliate so much. Stay tuned for episode 6.